everyone, welcome back to another deck profile of me, Chocobilly. This week I'm going to be looking at a deck called Untouchable Ice, and you might have noticed that the background behind me has changed ever so somewhat. I'm reorganizing my office, and it is liable to continue changing for a little while, but enough of that. Let's talk about the deck. So it's called Untouchable Ice. It is a mono ice deck, and for the most part it does a lot of the same things that most heavy discard decks do, using the likes of Biblos and Vice and Orphan and whatnot. But it also has an element of, as you can guess from the name, target avoidance. So I'll start with the backups, go to forwards, then summons and monsters. So right off the bat, you can see what I'm getting at with the Opus 1 Sarah backup. So if you control a card named Snow, it cannot be chosen by your opponent's abilities. Now you combo that with the most recent Snow from the Opus 19 starter deck. When Snow enters the field, if you control a card named Sarah, you can dull and freeze 3 of your opponent's characters, which is really nice. Or you can just make your opponent discard a card, which is fine in itself, and you can combo that with something like Vice or Biblos. But ultimately, if you're using those effects anyway, it depends ultimately what your opponent's got in their hand. If they've got nothing there, it means that Snow is still able to freeze things out despite them not having a hand. And in a deck like this, it's quite likely that your opponent will go down to no cards. But also, if you control a card named Lightning, Snow and the card named Lightning you control, again, this character cannot be chosen by opponent summons or just your opponent summons. So with Sarah and Lightning on the field, Snow is untargetable for both summons and abilities, and Lightning will also be untargetable through summons. So it means that they are kind of problematic. Now obviously they don't really have any Snow doesn't have any lasting effects on top of that, but he's still an 8k and still a forward that's hard to get rid of, and he also makes it so that also makes it so that Lightning cannot be hit through summons as well, which might actually be quite problematic. But back to the backups first. So next up we have Knight, just a couple of crystal generators to be honest, to use alongside, guess which one? Shantoto! Because she has a not broken effect, sorry, that's overstating it a bit, but it has a really powerful effect to be able to dull out all your opponent's forwards, which I really like. And then also, the break effect to choose a character of 3 or less, dull it, is still really good regardless. A lot of powerful forwards that are played these days are of a pretty low cost, so he should still be able to dull something out. Just remember that it can only be used on your turn. Unalaska, again, pretty standard tack for a mono ice discard deck. Using Unalaska might have been worth putting 3 in the deck, but I just went for 2 because not consistency, just not bricking, which is something I'm prone to, unfortunately. But yeah, that's it really. New Moo. So I really like this card, mostly due to the fact that it's got a break effect of put it into the break zone, choose one character, dull and freeze it. So you can actually dull and freeze your opponent's monsters or backups with this guy, which is really strong. If your opponent is using something like Tyro to color fix maybe, or just really horrible backup effects, or just stop your opponent from attacking with a monster, ultimately New Moo can cancel those effects. And at damage 3, when he enters the field, your opponent discards a card, so synergizes nicely with everything else. Next up, Kefka. Every time I build mono ice, I have to put Kefka in it because it's just so strong. To be able to choose one forward, dull it and freeze it, you can only ability if you have 5 or more ice backups. That's fine. I mean, I've never really struggled in this deck to get 5 backups. There's no backup engine, if I'm perfectly honest. But still, there's just 16 of them. There's a decent amount. And Kefka is really strong to just pay 1 CP to dull and freeze something. And it's an EX as well, which is always nice. I've got a singular Izael just to be able to find the right card for the right moment. It could be finding Shantoto to dull everything out. Could be finding Lightning to then play with the Snow already on the field. It could be finding the Snow to play with the Lightning on the field. It's just finds whatever's useful at the time. Idless, great EX burst, gets you a character back from your break zone, which means also backups as well. And with a few backup breaking effects, you can also combo that with getting some of your backups back to then, replay them. So say replaying something like New Moo, which at damage 3 gains an ability, isn't actually the worst. And then finally Nero, and a 3 of, because Nero, or rather Vice, is a very important part of the deck, and Nero is as well because he's ultimately what gives Vice the ability to make your opponent discard a card. Anyway, let's go to the forwards. So first up we have a 2 of the Opus of the 1 cost Lightning. Again, pretty standard tack because she is really strong. You get your opponent to no cards, you play a Lightning on the field. they're going to have to start getting rid of her fast, otherwise she will become a problem, because she's big, she's got haste, and she can deal your opponent passive points of damage as well, which is, you know, horrible. And not to mention the fact that you can play such a cheap forward, and then it become untargetable through summons if you've got snow on the field. That's pretty horrible. If your opponent's answer to lightning is a summon, they better hope that you don't have snow on the field. Charlotte, so another form of untarget, or rather a lightning rod in this case, to make it so that if you've got a problematic forward on the field, they have to get rid of Charlotte first. Simple, really. Next up we have Untouchable. Now this is a fun card. It's got an EX, but when Untouchable enters the field, each player selects one card from their break zone and adds it to their hand. Then each player discards one card. Ultimately, the reason behind this card is if your opponent has no hand, they add something to their hand, and then they have to discard it. So this is actually a way to make your opponent discard a card despite them having no cards in hand whatsoever. So a lot of fun, because obviously when you're facing a mono ice, you know, super discard deck, you're probably going to just end up rinsing your hand, because ultimately Theodore's coming down, or you're just going to be getting your stuff frozen up because you've got the cards. You know, you want to empty your hand so the opponent can't make you discard, so that your stuff doesn't get frozen. But Untouchable makes it so that you can still make your opponent discard stuff. Quite fun. Mustadio. Now, this is a bit of a weird one, I admit, because Mustadio isn't the best, but I love Final Fantasy Tactics, and I like Mustadio, and I think his effect is fun regardless. Ultimately, yeah, he's a back attack, so you can play him to stall something out if things are going sideways a little bit, but he can also cost 0, which is a lot of fun. And then when he enters the field, choose one character, dull it, and when Mustadio's put from the field to the break zone, you gain a crystal, which also combos nicely with Shantoto, so you could back attack with Mustadio just to block with him for him to die. And then you get the crystal ready for the following turn to use Shantoto to dolly opponents forwards out to push for game, potentially. And yeah, it also works nicely with something like Iodolus, so if your opponent hits an Iodolus to damage, you can then get Mustadio back to your hand, you can then play him onto the field, and you've got an attack of the following turn, not to mention dolling out one of your opponents attacking forwards. And on your opponent's turn, there is only one card in the deck that makes it... Well, no, I tell a lie, technically there's two, but... There's only one way you'll be able to use Mustadio's effect to make your opponent discard on their turn, and that is a Glacier Lavalus. You got Zalera, you got Shiva. I mean, yeah, there's... Actually, no... Yeah, sorry. Choose one dull forward, of course, 2 or less break. Your opponent breaks it and discards cards. So you got 2 summons in the deck that can do it, 2 cards in the deck that can make your opponent discard on their turn. But that then means that Mustadio's effect, or Mustadio's cost, sorry, then becomes 0, which is also kind of nice. Shantoto. Again, you can play it onto the field for 1 CP if your opponent's got, is it 2 cards less, 1 card less, 1 card less in their hand, and then get back just a horrible card, you know, get back your Vice, get back your Snow, get back whatever you want, because Shantoto's cheap, and then you play it onto the field, and yeah. And she's got a really good effect as well. For 2 CP, remove it from the game and pay a crystal. There's 3 crystal generators, well, technically 4, in the game. So, yeah, you should hopefully get Shantoto's effect at some point, and it's just, you know, it's untargeted, just a complete dull your opponent's forwards. So powerful. Vice. Man needs no introduction. When your opponent discards a card, you get to dull and freeze something, and it can be a character as well, so again, pretty brutal. This card, alongside Untouchable, when you've got a Biblos as well, is just, disgusting. It's so horrible. But also, at damage 5, he gains plus 1,000, and when Vice cannot be chosen by opponent summons or abilities. So again, another means of making it so that your opponent cannot target your forwards. You've got Vice, you've got Snow, you've got Lightning, you got Charlotte to make it so other forwards are harder to target. So yeah, and then technically you got Biblos as well, which, you know, until it becomes a forward, can't be broken through those effects that would break forwards. So, you know, lots of ways of making it hard for your opponent to actually choose something on your field. Already gone over Snow, but yeah, ultimately he can make it so Lightning is untargetable, as well as potentially himself alongside Sarah, and yeah, be able to dull off these 3 characters with a backup Sarah, which, you know, there are 3 Snow in the game, so chances are you'll be able to play a couple. You could argue maybe upping the Sarahs to 3, but again, like I said before, I tend to brick a lot, so I would rather not, if I'm perfectly honest. But playing Snow onto the field, even if just making your opponent discard a card, that added effect of also making it so that Lightning can't be targeted by summons, as well as Snow potentially being completely proof, is wonderful. Now we've got the Light Lightning from the I can't see where it was. This was from the, was it the anniversary box, I think? But ultimately, it's another Lightning, so it's the 3rd Lightning in the deck. But it has I think it fits the deck really, really nicely. Obviously, it's got an EX Burst, where you can choose a forward other than Lightning, return to its owner's hand. So actually, you can choose your own forwards, which is quite funny. So you could attack with something, say like, I don't know, Vice. Doesn't get blocked, you then attack with Lightning, you then put Vice back in your hand, and then after the attack's gone through, you then main phase 2, play Vice back on the field, make your opponent discard a card. What's also fantastic with this is that Lightning is bouncing your opponent's forwards back to their hand, so they might not have any cards in their hand normally, but then you use Lightning to bounce it back to their hand. You then use something like, I don't know, Unalesque or whatever, to then make them discard that card. So even if they don't have cards, it's another means of giving them or putting cards in their hand so that they have to discard them. And then you've got pay 1, put 2 cards into the break zone, and choose a forward, dull it, or activate it. So you can activate your own if you really want to do, or activate your opponent's if you had a reason behind it, or just dull them the other way. So, I mean, depending on how late in the game you are, that payment can be a bit costly, so be mindful of that, but still, I think it's worth it. Being able to just dull something the other way, or activate something for a block is really, really good. And not to mention that, you know, it's just this Lightning, to be honest, I think is actually more painful than the 1 CP Lightning, because she has an on-attack effect. And again, if your opponent wants to get rid of it through a summon, which is generally most people's forms of removal, right? They can't target it. Now, obviously, they could target with something like Amaterasu or the newer Leviathan, but again, well, actually, I can't remember if the Leviathan targets the effect or not, because that's the reason Amaterasu gets around Lightning or Snow's effect even. Can't be targeted by summons, you're not targeting Lightning or Snow themselves, you're targeting their effect, and then dealing them damage. But, you know, she's a 9k, so she would survive an Amaterasu regardless. But yeah, making it so that your opponent's forwards go back into the hand, ready for you to make them discard anyway, is pretty fun. Right, 3 of Vitalis, because she loves to capitalise on the fact your opponent's got no hand. She's got really brutal S to deal 10k to something and make your opponent discard a card. But also she's really good for the draw acceleration. Your opponent's got no cards in hand, and you don't want to dull and freeze anything out anyway. Just draw another card. That's a really, really, really good ice card. Orphan, EX Burst to dull something out, but ultimately make your opponent discard a card every single turn. He's just a disgusting card. That's really horrible to come up against, but ultimately, you know, you don't have to have him in the deck, or you don't have to have him knocking around to work for the deck to really work. But I think, to be honest, he's just such a really useful engine. Sorry, I don't know what I'm quoting Thomas Tank Engine. But regardless, yeah, just having that discarding reliably every single turn is horrible. 9 times out of 10. If you've got Orphan on the field and then anything like Biblos or Vice, your opponent on the following turn will empty their hand, or even the turn you play with Orphan, they will empty their hand to make it so that you don't get the dull off, the discard, or freezes or whatever. But, you know, if it empties their hand, even if it breaks one of your forwards or a couple of your forwards, it might still be worth it, to be honest. And yeah, now, as you can probably tell, initially I was going to put the newer Lightning in this deck, the other Lightning with the same from the same deck set as Snow, Opus 19, but I wanted to go with the new new Ice. Oh my god, the old Lightning. Anyway, but yeah, obviously this being a Opus 13 card. Final Fantasy 13. I can't speak anymore, I'm sorry. Opus 13. It would get the effect of Lightning attacking, buffing all your forwards, and then this one could attack, buff your forwards, draw a card, you know, stuff like that. So there are ways to add that Lightning into this deck, have more Ice 13 forwards in the deck if you really wanted to be able to get those effects. And then finally Theodore, again pretty standard, heavy discard. Loves to be massive if your opponent's got no cards on hand, which will probably happen. If not, play him early to hopefully make your opponent empty their hand. Just be mindful of the fact that if they empty their hand and it's going aggressive, you need to meet that aggression. Even if Theodore comes onto the field and he's a 9k first striker, doesn't matter if they're in something like fire, they just need the right summon at the right time, or even the right abilities, you know, party attacks, whatever. So yeah, just be mindful of making your opponent empty their hand, because it can go backwards. Anyway, let's move on to the summons. So we've got the little 1-cost Shiva from Opus 18. Because it's mono ice, it means that you should be able to remove 10 ice cards from your break zone to then break a forward. That's really easy to do. And if at the very least just dull and freeze something, it's just for 1 CP, that's fantastic. This Shiva, so this is your anti-squall or something along those lines, Shiva. So choose a forward if it deals damage other than battle damage to a forward. This turn, the damage becomes 0 instead. Really, really good way to just, oh, there's a horrible effect happening. Shiva, stop it from happening. Or ultimately just break a 2-cost, a dull 2-cost or less, and your opponent's card's gone. Glacial Avalanche, just because I want to be able to make my opponent's card on their turn as well. But also dull and freezing out a forward, or just use a forward 7k. I could have just added another Shiva in here, but I like the versatility of it, even though it's not really that versatile in the grand scheme of things anymore. Zalera, because it's like Ice's only board wipe, so just being able to get rid of, as long as you kill at least a couple of things, it's probably fine. And then the free cast Shiva. Dull and freeze a forward, draw a card, just really good. And like I said before, you could hypothetically attack with lightning to bounce your own forward back to your hand if you haven't been able to play an ice forward this turn. Play it back onto the field, then you can free cast Shiva. So, again, not bad. Biblos, you get to make your opponent discard and freeze stuff out. What more is there to say? And then finally, Scale Toad. You don't play Scale Toad every game, but sometimes there are games where your opponents they like to draw a lot. So in those games, that's when you play Scale Toad. They don't want to be ending their turns on, over 2 cards. And if you've got something like Vice and Biblos on the field, you also then make them discard, then you're done and freezing other stuff out as well. That's pretty rancid. And that's the deck. There's a fair few different cards you could throw into the deck just to make them a bit better, but there are certain combos in the deck that I really, really like. I mean, you could throw in the Opus, is it 17 Edward, to just remove stuff from your opponent's break zone, because that's a supremely useful effect. But the reason I avoided using him, aside from the fact that I filled up all my backup slots using something like Sarah, you don't want to rely on too many activated effects, because you'll end up eating into your CP of the turn you would play to leave those backups open for your opponent's turn. And then if you end up discarding cards just for the sake of it, then was it really worth it? I don't know. But yeah, so I tried to avoid using too many of those, especially when I was probably using Kefka every single turn, so he was basically always dull, right? Then you got Unalaska, that's a really useful effect. Probably using a new Moo or a Knight, so you need to be careful of adding too many activated effects. And then, yeah, like I said before, you could throw in the Opus 19 Lightning, Lightning, to get the Final Fantasy 13 effects off and throw more 13 cards into the deck if you really wanted. But this Lightning, or rather the PR110P card, I think is a lot of fun. So yeah, I think it's got a place in it. And most of the times I play this deck, it's run fairly well. Like, even without the backup engine, it still does alright. I mean, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 2-cost backups with, 6 faux 2 costs. They get you something to hand at the very least, even though you're paying the 4. So, the summons could be shifted around. You could go for 3 Shivas, you could go for the Opus 19 Shiva even. But yeah, the one problem is once you come up against something that's hyper aggressive and runs you down, not much you can do about it. And yeah, if you come up against wind, you're screwed. Thanks for watching, guys. Bye.